I recall a man who had me kill another man in front of his son, and he didn't bat an eye. You remember that?
Yeah, of course I remember.
What you said was that this is my world. And in my world, you gotta get dirty. So that's what I'm doing. I'm getting dirty.
And that was a scene from Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained, which opens on Christmas Day. Now, let me repeat, the movie hasn't opened, so no spoilers here. But that hasn't stopped it from already causing controversy among critics. The question isn't whether America is ready for a film about slavery. It's whether or not this revenge-style presentation trivializes slavery altogether. At the table, UPenn's Anthea Butler, rejoining me, MSNBC contributor Ari Melber, who recently wrote about the amorality of Django Unchained for The Atlantic. We're going to ask him about that. Michael Skolnik, editor-in-chief of GlobalGrind.com, and Touré, host of MSNBC's The Cycle. All right, I knew this was going to be a hot one. I mean, they just assembled the right.
Just let it go, Joy. Just let it flow, Joy.
But you know, since Ari wrote that this film was amoral, I want to go to Ari first. Ari, what do you mean? What do you, without any spoilers, keeping in mind, right, people haven't seen the film, what did you mean about the film having amorality?
Yes, you can keep your television on and still see this movie.
Right.
What I will say without revealing the end is that it is one thing to reflect evil and reflect a tragedy, and another to luxuriate in it. And my problem with this film, having going in with an open mind and liking some of Tarantino's previous work, is that he takes the evil of slavery, which we will never be done talking about because it is part of our history and it is part of our present and it is part of our future, and he uses it as a license to go on a mass murder killing spree, to, as I said, luxuriate in elements of racism that for me didn't feel historical, ethical, or judicious, but felt rather slavish. People will come to this movie. People should see this movie, and I hope it sparks a really good cultural conversation. But at the end of the day, I don't think you can go into this place as an artist and not take it more serious.
But
Joy,
I mean,
Joy, if I did not sit in the theater next to Ari as we watched it, we were at the screening together, then I would swear he did not actually watch the movie. Right. This is a movie about love, two forms of love, right? It's about romantic love. He is searching for his wife, and he's willing to go through hell to rescue his wife from the worst thing, and he's willing to become the worst thing imaginable, a black slaver, in order to rescue her. That is a very romantic and beautiful story. The violence is just to get through that. We have to go through hell to rescue her. But then it's about self-love, right? In the opening scene, he throws off the rug that he's wearing, right? Like James Brown throwing off his cape, and he is attacking white supremacy throughout the film. And he's this constant refrain of he's riding into town on this horse, shoulders back, head high, these glasses on. Nobody has ever seen any person of blackness with this level of dignity, and they're all constantly shocked by this. And one of the key moments in the film, Leonardo DiCaprio says, there's more of them than us. Why don't they just kill us? If I was them, I would. And he goes into this phrenology explanation, which is obviously not real, but he's close, right? It's not in the brain. Our brains are not any different, but the minds are different, right? And we've talked about the colonized mind on this show, and Django, Fox's attack on that mind throughout the piece is cathartic, it is heroic, and the killings that he does in this film of people who represent slavery are heroic. And if he wasn't killing slave masters and Samuel L. Jackson, who represent slavery, then he would be psychotic. And it's the exact same thing that you have in your professor.
Stop. We need to mediate between
let me mediate between two things. I don't think it's romantic, and I'm going to tell you why I don't think it's romantic. Because the real life slavery wasn't romantic. When I teach this in my classrooms, my students are just dead because I dragged them through slavery to lynchings to all this stuff, and they're just like beat up by the time we get to the 1920s. And I tell them, you need to see this much, you need to understand this violence. And we read real narratives. We read the narratives of the WPA and everything else. And one of the things I brought up when we were talking about the show beforehand is that this whole thing is just violent nonstop. But the way that the violence violence happens is towards black people, and black people being able to, try to rise up above that stuff. This movie, which I haven't seen, I have to say this up front, is doing something very different. So I don't think it's just immoral. I think that there's some kind of weaving between that Tarantino does to try to hold this movie together.
Because look, you're saying that slavery obviously was violent. It was corrosive. This movie is violent, and perhaps some people would say it's appropriately violent for what it's discussing. Michael, you're a filmmaker. From your perspective,
I am. I think, and I've never really been a Tarantino fan for his violence. It's been an issue for me. But when I watch this film, I think the challenge is that the violence against black people is what's brutal.
Yeah.
Right? That's the brutality.
Yeah.
The violence against black people, the burning of the flesh, the torture, the putting in these hot
This stuff
boxes.
happened, though. This is the point.
We haven't
But that's
seen
in the
this.
film.
We haven't seen this.
we haven't seen it before.
In this capacity. And then the response, the revenge killing, right? That is heroic. That's triumphant. And the problem that Americans have, I think, with this film, or will have with this film, is that Django's triumph is our triumph over slavery. But we haven't reconciled. We talk about it, Ari, you're right. But we haven't reconciled slavery.
Right.
No,
but
and people don't want to talk about it.
And what we haven't reconciled, right, is the catharsis aspect, what you were talking about. This sort of, when you read the history of slavery, you wonder to yourself, my goodness, why didn't African Americans just rise up? Why didn't they sort of do what was done in Haiti? Why wasn't there more violence against slave owners when oftentimes blacks were in the majority? So, I mean, Ari, are you reacting against the idea that this is just an emotional catharsis film where black people can go to the theater and watch slaves kill white people? Is that what you're finding objectionable, or is it something just about the violence being cartoonish and being ahistorical?
I mean, we're on television, so how much should I say about my feelings about killing white people? Even Jamie Foxx got in trouble for that. This is my problem with it. Not the catharsis, not the reckoning, but the lack of, as I put it, morality in the reckoning. There was a big difference with Inglourious Bastards because it started out another Tarantino film that had a very similar revenge fantasy for Jews and Nazis, and it started out in this pursuit of Nazis. But what we saw by the end of the film was that the Christoph Waltz character, Hans Landa, was not actually evil. Tarantino was exploring not anti-Semitism emanating from this person's heart, but the banality or the plasticity of evil. That to me was much more subtle. What we saw here was the notion that everyone was terribly evil, so that means you can go on a mass murder spree. And again, without spoilers, I think people who see this movie will see that it's not only the evil slave masters who die, there are other people who die. And so in the end, as I argue in
slavery, who are part of the infrastructure of slavery. He doesn't, as Jamie Foxx said in the package, he doesn't just go on a killing spree of any white person he encounters. He goes on a killing spree of people who are part of the infrastructure of slavery.
There's one moment where he has a moment of clarity. Should he kill one person or not? I won't give it away. And this
is what I would say without giving it away. Without giving it away, my response to that is there's a legal principle of self-protection, and he, by the end, sacrifices that, and I don't think Tarantino works well.
Okay, hold on just one second. Hold on. We're going to let two words, and we're going to go.
Nat Turner.
Okay.
And this is what you need to think about. When you say this hasn't happened before, there are all kinds of slave rebellions. They just got squelched, okay? And people, I mean, in Nat Turner's rebellion, I believe it's 50 or 51 people get killed. Well, and so this is what's going to be interesting to me is when I see this film, to think about what happened with Nat Turner, I'm wondering if this is sort of like the Styron sort of way of doing Django Unchained, you know, to ascribe all
Okay, well, hold on.
I said we don't need to make the Nat Turner movie anymore.
Okay, we got to go. When we come back on the other side, we got to talk about the thing. I don't believe anybody brought it up, the N-word piece, but we're also going to talk about Kerry Washington. Kerry Washington defended herself from the critics who take issue with her turn as a damsel in distress. We're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about the N-word with this panel on the other side.
Nice.